What would you say if I told you that you could paint like a master in less than an hour? I'm crazy? Well, guess what? I might be a little crazy, but trust me, I'm confident that you already have the skills. And to prove it to you, we're going to paint something in the style of one of the most famous artists ever. We are going to be painting water lilies in the style of Monet. Wait, did I just hear you say that you can't do it? Well, guess what? I'm determined to prove you wrong. So let's dive right in. But before we do, here's the deal. Let me ask you to do one thing for me. If you thought I was going to say subscribe or like this video, you're wrong, even though admittedly, that would be nice. What I want you to do is check your anxiety and your nerves at the door because we're going to have fun with this. So just enjoy the process and take it as a moment to meditate, relax, recharge, namaste. So grab your brushes and let's create some magic together. So we're going to be using ultramarine, cobalt turquoise. We're going to be going with a quinacridone rose or something similar, and maybe a raw sienna and an indigo as well. And don't kill yourself if you don't have like the exact same colors as me. If you have something in the blue territory, in the turquoise territory, you'll be fine. I don't want you to have to go pick up anything that you don't already have. In terms of the paper, I have a block of Etcher paper, which they very generously sent over to me to test, and I'm actually really loving this paper for wet on wet techniques, and you'll see in this video how well it performs under the duress of a lot of water. If you do not have this pad, then I would go with something cold pressed since that stands up very well to water. In the brush department, Etcher also very kindly sent over more goodies for me, including this collection of brushes that comes in this really fun, like this carry case is like something out of like Top Chef or something. It's like, to your stations, chefs. So I'm picking out 2 brushes for this entire project. So I'm going to have a flat brush with a square tip, as well as a round brush. And if there are other brushes that you like or that you have in your, at your disposal, then definitely pick out what inspires you. If you are using one brush though, just make sure that the tip of that round brush is really nice and sharp so you can get to the details with that. All right, so first thing we're going to do, artists, is we are going to wet our brush and we are going to coat the entire surface of this paper with water. So consider this your warm-up, and if you were at work all day and you're letting go of that stress of the day, or if you were at home with the kids and this is finally the time where you're able to sit down and do something for yourself, congratulate yourself on getting here, because that's where things start. Take a deep breath, let go of your day, and no matter what the outcome of this particular painting that we're sitting down to do right now, it doesn't matter, because what we're here to do is to practice and develop and hone in our skills as watercolorists. So right now I'm going to pick my first color, and that's going to be ultramarine. If it's not the exact color that I have, don't worry, just pick whatever's closest to that. And I'm going to pick some of my cobalt turquoise, and these are going to be my 2 founding colors for the water part of my pond. Now, using my flat brush, I'm going to use the side of this brush to lay down some horizontal strokes. Get those brush strokes onto the page and allow them to bleed. And so this is not about trying to control the situation. Quite the opposite, my friend. This is about letting go and letting the watercolors do their thing, which they will gladly do on their own without us trying to micromanage the situation. I'm using the side of my brush, I'm using the flat, larger part of my brush, and what I'm going to try to do here is lay out a composition that kind of leads your eye around the page. If you'll notice, I left an area on the top right blank, as well as the lower left-hand corner. So just this kind of composition will encourage the viewer to sort of snake their way down in sort of like an S-curve way. So it kind of leads the viewer's eye in a direction as opposed to getting stuck, not knowing where to focus on. So if composition is something that is challenging to you, then just follow what I have on the screen. Or if you want to try out your own composition, then definitely try that. Just make sure to leave some areas a little bit less dense than others to allow for that viewer circulation, let's call it. As you can see, as the paints are starting to bleed into one another, it's kind of creating this soft, dreamy kind of effect. And what you're seeing right now is actually the reflections of the lily pads onto the water. And we're getting a little bit of a glimpse of that impressionist sort of style going on here, because it's all about light and airiness and relinquishing control a bit of the details in order to capture the essence or the feeling of the place as opposed to being super literal about it. So, I mean, I could just walk away from this now and be really happy. I don't know about you, but just this part alone I think is so satisfying. And I was recently listening to a podcast by a museum conservator. They were talking about how having different brushstrokes and trying to vary that as much as possible is like creating different instruments in like a symphony. So right now I'm dotting my canvas or my paper with short brushstrokes, and I'm introducing longer brushstrokes. And so the more you can vary it, the more interesting and the fuller your orchestra is going to be. And I love that analogy. So switching things up, I'm picking up my round brush and I'm going to load it up with my quinacridone rose. And I'm going to dull that color a little bit so it's not so straight out of the tube. I'm mixing it with a bit of raw sienna, with a bit of ultramarine, and trying to get that depth, because this is going to be the pink that we're using for the flowers on, well, the water lily flowers, the lotus flowers, I guess. Is there a difference between a water lily and a lotus? I don't know, but let me know in the comments below. So using the very tip of my brush, I'm just touching the paper close to some of those brush strokes that we made earlier. So if you see an area that has a clear definition of like a horizontal brush strokes, I think that's a really nice area for a lily to appear. Be very sparse with it. You don't have to do like too much of it. And I'm actually following that snake-like S-curve to lead your eye in the direction that I want to take it in. So because the paper is still wet, the paint will be bleeding all over the place. And that will be the case with your pink as well. So if you're looking at this and going, oh, it's bleeding and I ruined it and this doesn't look good, just calm that inner voice, take a deep breath again, and this is completely intentional. So right now we're building the mood and the ambiance. So right here in the lower right-hand corner, I'm going to put a larger lotus flower, and this is going to be very simple. We're just talking about 5 petals, and again, this whole thing is going to bleed again. So don't get too hung up on the, petals being the perfect shape and, angle, that kind of thing, because it's going to bleed anyway. We're just kind of creating the underpainting and that glow that is later going to become an actual lotus, and a larger one at that, because it's going to be closer to the viewer. Now I'm going to add a little bit more of my quinacridone rose to some of these areas to encourage it to bleed even more, and maybe one here. As you can see, it's sort of like turning into these nondescript blobby orbs. So one thing I noticed from the inspiration book of Monet's late water lilies is that he incorporated a fair amount of what looks like either yellow ochre or raw sienna as a way to warm up areas of his painting. And that's what we're going to do right now, is we're going to pick up a lighter chestnutty brown color. So whether you have yellow ochre or maybe you have raw sienna or burnt sienna, something in that vicinity color-wise, and add it to your painting as well. I'm trying to be somewhat random about it, but with the idea that I'm snaking it around kind of like in that S-curve that we were talking about before. To me, the yellow ochre looks really beautiful next to the rose, but it also looks really nice blending into the blue too. So if you want to add a little bit more blue to kind of help encourage them to bleed into one another, you can do that too. So this is looking like a hot mess right now, but that's fine. This is the intention for this stage of the painting. We're going to let this dry fully. Now go out, go get a drink of water, go walk the dog, go change the baby's diaper, which is probably what I'm going to do, and let's meet up again once your paper has dried. All right, folks, we are back for stage 2 of the painting, and we are going to wet our brushes again and get started on some beautiful lily pads. So pick up some blue or some green or somewhere in between, doesn't really matter. Grab your flat brush, and we are going to use just the top of that brush to create these very flat marks. And those are going to be for the lily pads that are the furthest away from the viewer. So what's great about this is that the brush is doing all the heavy lifting for you. We are just using it kind of like a rubber stamp to create these marks that evoke the feeling of lily pads. And as you travel down the page towards the bottom, you can allow yourself to give that brush a bit more pressure, which will make your lily pads look a bit thicker and more rounded, which contributes to this feeling of it being a bit more three-dimensional. So we are starting to layer up and create more depth, as well as in terms of the values. Right now we are adding another layer, which is giving us more depth. So let's add a couple more of those marks towards the top of the page and maybe about a third of the way down. And now I'm going to maybe just add one more little darker area here. Okay, I like that. So now I'm going to change brushes. Surprise, surprise, right? So the reason for changing brushes is to create visual interest now. And also, in the same vein of letting the brush do all the work for you, with this round brush, we're just going to lay the side of the brush down to create these elongated oval shapes. So you don't have to paint circles or ovals or whatever. You can just lay that brush down on its side or its belly, and it will magically create these absolutely perfect lily pad shapes for you. One of the misconceptions of painting, and specifically with brushes, is that people think that brushes should be held or used in a certain way, like creating like the perfect brush strokes and creating outlines of things, when sometimes you can just use a section of the brush and just press it down on the paper and get an absolutely elegant mark that would be very difficult to get to if you were, trying so hard to get the perfect shape or to draw in the perfect thing. So sometimes it's all about relinquishing control, and not only does that make for a less stressful painting environment or experience, but there's also something incredibly elegant about just letting things be and being at peace with that. So let's continue to bring these lily pads down towards the bottom. And if you haven't noticed, I am increasing the size of those elongated ovals as I start to get closer and closer to the bottom of the page. And I don't know about you, but these are looking less like blobs and more like water lilies to me. I don't know, what do you think? I think we're getting there, right? Okay, so let's keep going and keep bringing these down. And just like with the rest of it, the same concept applies for the composition, where I am not putting the lily pads everywhere. I am just kind of following that intention of that S-curve and having the lily pads appear only in those areas. And that's to kind of help it not have massive visual overload. I'm also bringing a bit of that raw sienna or that yellow ochre. I forget what color I'm using, to be honest. Let me check it. Okay, it's yellow ochre. And I am going back and forth between that and my blue and my cobalt. I'm also going to create a larger lily pad in the front. And this is going to be, forgive the 80s reference, this is going to be like a squashed Pac-Man. There, I said it. There's no other way to describe it. It's like Pac-Man just kind of like eating all the dots off the page. But you know what I mean, artists. But if Pac-Man doesn't evoke anything to you, it's essentially like a squashed circle with a little slice of the pie taken out of it. And feel free to build up in value here. So if you want to bring some more of your blue or more of your turquoise and kind of get this area to pop, be my guest. As for me, I'm bringing some of that ultramarine from my palette right underneath what's going to be this lily flower, and making it kind of big so it's cropped off the page. It kind of gives you the impression that it's like you're taking a picture and part of that lily has been chopped off by the frame of the camera. So artists, here is the part where it'll all depend on your composition. So I'm adding, little touches here and there wherever I see the negative space, or I want to fill in or not fill in, but add some darker values to make things pop a bit more. So this part will depend on your choices and what you want to do. And there is no right or wrong way to do this. So abandon right now the expectation of getting it right, because there's just no such thing. So follow your instincts, and my instincts are telling me that I want some watered down water lilies right here, so that's what I'm going to do. So follow along and add your own special touches as we go. All right, so we are coming back to the world of pinks, and we're going to add some details for our lotuses. And this is going to be super simple, guys. It's going to be just these brush strokes that are all emanating from one central point. Kind of like how a child draws a star or a sun. And what we want to do here is put more petals on the top and have less of them on the bottom. And we're also going to make the ones on the bottom less full. So they're going to be sort of cupping the flower on either side. So those bottom petals will only come out to the sides on the left and right. So follow along with me. And as you can see, I'm kind of choosing to put these flowers right above where I had those pink bleeds, where we did all that really cool wet on wet transitioning business with the blues and the pinks. And so you can choose to put them there as well, or you can put them wherever you want, honestly. It's very forgiving, which is part of what I love about this. And another little rule, and I'm not giving you a lot of rules because this is all about just exploring and relaxing, and you can see I'm being totally loose about this, but you can make your lotus flowers smaller towards the top of the page and get them to be gradually larger as you get closer and closer to the bottom. So again, that's building in that dimension. If you want. If you don't want to do it that way, then it's totally cool to make this piece completely abstract too and just have a ton of fun with color. I mean, why not? So this is your time, my friends, and your time to experiment and to do whatever it is your heart desires on this page. So keep going with me and let's start adding some petals for this larger flower in the front. And I'm going to follow the same rules as I did for those smaller flowers, just layering on top of what I already had, creating these layers of petals that are all coming from one central point, which is in the lower third of this flower. And as you can see, my flowers are pretty fuzzy. They're not perfect. They're not coming out of a botanical book. They're more like they're coming out of a dream. So if you have any inner critic's voice that's starting to creep in and you're looking at your page going, oh, this is not turning out the way I want it to look and it's not looking realistic, put that voice aside, put that thought aside, because that's not what we're here to do. We're here to dream, to imagine, to practice, and to hone in on our craft. Oh, and of course, to have fun too. And I hope you also realize that for somebody like myself who does this for a living and who's been doing this for my entire life, I get that voice too. I get that moment of doubt. So you are definitely not alone, my friend. So at this point, what I'm doing is adding some layers of pink to go on top of the layers that I've already painted. So make sure that the layer underneath is dry, and then it's just a question of adding some more layers of brushstrokes on top, which kind of mimics the way that a flower is actually composed. So right now I'm mixing a darker value of my ultramarine blue, and right here I'm going to add some details to my lily pad. So I'm just adding a quick brush stroke on the bottom lip of each of the pads to make them look somewhat three-dimensional and not like they're completely flat. So that gives them that slight edge that they have. Edge in the literal sense, not edgy like these are like hard rock, edgy lily pads. Although, if anybody's up for the challenge, I think it would make for a pretty interesting art piece. Okay, so let's mix up a darker value to add some shading to the front two lily pads. So I'm gonna add a little bit of a shadow underneath this lotus flower, and then some additional darker values on some of the other lily pads as well. And the more you add variance between your values, the more realistic and the more refined your objects will look, even though, as you can see, my brush strokes are pretty crude and not that refined. So even then, when you zoom out and you see it big picture, your eyes don't really focus on the details of every single brushstroke. You sort of kind of see it as a whole, and so that gives you a bit more flexibility to be more expressive with things. But yeah, do remember the fact that the more you vary your brushstroke styles, weights, and your values, the more interesting and the more professional the final outcome will look. Speaking about final outcome, I think that these lilies are looking pretty good. They're not too overworked and they're not too tight, more along the lines of expressive and loose. So let's put some finishing touches here, and I'm kind of alternating between my blues, my pinks, and my browns, wherever I feel like it needs a little extra sparkle, a little extra spunk. And maybe some shadows underneath, or not shadows, but some reflections underneath some of these lily pads to make them look like they're floating around on this beautiful pond. And as for my painting, I feel like every painting I create has what I would call like my favorite or my sweet spot. And for me so far, I feel like the top corner here that I'm working on right now is my favorite, because it just has these wonderful moments where you have these deep contrasts between the ultramarine and some beautiful bleeds, and it has just variations in color. So step back for a second and evaluate where you're at and where you want to add those touches. So let's add one more thing, which is going to be a branch, like a weeping willow branch. And I'm using my flat brush to, just like a rubber stamp or like a stamper, just stamp these elongated shapes with the tip of my brush. And there are going to be 3, maybe 4 of them that come about half to 3/4 of the way down your page. And what's great about this is it's going to create a sense of framing, or another layer, so to speak. So it adds a bit more visually, and it also adds some more depth, which I think is a really nice touch. So let's deepen and darken that a bit more so that really pops and stands out. And no, we're not done. I can't help myself. A couple more brush strokes. So this is probably the hardest part of the painting for me, knowing when to walk away. So artists, when you're done and you are ready to put your brushes down, take another deep breath. You showed up today, and that's what matters most. As always, thank you so much for watching and for joining me on these art videos. Keep painting, keep being creative, keep experimenting, and I'll see you in the next video.